Bodiam Castle was constructed in the early 1380s by Sir Edward Dallingridge and his wife Elizabeth. The couple lived in a turbulent age. They saw the arrival in England of the Black Death in 1348 and became participants in the 100 Years' War between England and France. In later life, Edward would become a soldier of fortune, a knight of the Shire of Sussex and warden of London. As a servant of the Crown, Edward reached the highest circles of English society, and Bodiam Castle served as a visible testimony to his status and wealth. Sir Edward Dallingridge was born on the family's manor at Fletching, on or about the year 1346. His father, Roger, had fought as a man of arms in King Edward III's campaign against the Scottish in 1336, and for his service was later given the position of Royal Forester. Indeed, the family name comes from Dallingridge in the Ashdown Forest. Edward's mother, Alice Radingham, was one of 3 daughters of Sir John de Radingham, whose family held much land in Sussex and the East Midlands. When John died in 1350, Roger and Alice inherited 5 Sussex manors, with their principal seat being at Fletching, some 25 miles to the west of Bodiam. Edward Dallingridge was born almost 10 years into the 100 Years' War between England and France, the same year as King Edward III's army defeated the French at the Battle of Crecy. The following year, England captured Calais, and so a port from which to mount raids into France. Since the Black Death had decreased the number of soldiers available to the English, their favoured tactic was then to mount raids on horseback, with the aim of despoiling enemy territory by fire and ransacking. The political chaos caused by the Black Death allowed for opportunistic bands of Englishmen gathered from all social backgrounds to seek their fortune in France. And although they proclaimed their actions to be for the king, their prime motivation was to profit by any means possible. At the Battle of Poitiers in the year 1356, King John II of France was taken captive and brought to England, where he was held captive in Sussex, an event that must certainly have been known to the then 10-year-old Edward. At the age of 13, no doubt influenced by the events of the 100 Years' War and King John's imprisonment, Edward joined his first military campaign with King Edward III's army at Rheims in 1359. After experiencing combat and deciding that that was the life for him, Edward chose to join up with Robert Knolly, the leader of a free company. Knolly's free company was in reality a group of savage mercenaries who robbed, ransomed and terrorised the people of France during the still ongoing 100 Years' War. Knolly himself had such a fierce reputation that it was said that the French peasantry would throw themselves into the river, putting themselves at a very real risk of drowning, rather than be in the way of Knolly and his free company. After a few years plundering France, Edward returned to England and married Elizabeth Wardew of Bodiam. Together the couple had 2 children, Margaret and John, the latter of which would follow in his father's career and become knighted as a royal man-at-arms. Edward, though, saw little of his children and went back to fight in France, only returning to England in 1377 following the death of his father-in-law and so the inheritance of his lands, including the site on which now stands Bodiam Castle. France, for their part in the 100 Years' War, was certainly active, and in 1377 successfully raided the coastal towns of Rye and New Winchelsea. Not prepared to accept enemy incursions so near to his home, Edward then joined the attack and eventual capture of the port of Cherbourg the following year. With his profile steadily increasing, Edward was promoted in 1379 to Knight of the Shire of Sussex by the new King Richard II. This promotion was soon followed by him being installed as the Commissioner for examining the state of the nation and expenses of the King's household, a trusted and favoured position. However, continuing French raids on the south coast of England would soon draw Edward back into combat, and after an engagement with the French near Bourne in Sussex, Edward was reported to the king as having been grievously wounded. Yet despite this, he was sufficiently recovered to take responsibility for the fortification of Rye Town 2 years later in 1382, a task that would see him there for a further 3 years. During his tenure at Rye, Edward did not forget his estate at Bodiam and began rebuilding the church, and was granted permission to hold a market, both important indicators that Edward intended Bodiam to be his main residence. As a Knight of the Shire of Sussex, Edward was the county's representative in Parliament. When the 1385 session opened on the 20th of October, Edward immediately applied for a licence to crenellate his castle for the purpose of defending the adjacent countryside and resisting the king's enemies, and frankly, no doubt a fair few enemies of his own making. Under the reign of Edward II, Edward also served as the captain of Brest between 1386 and 1387, and commissioner for both the conclusion of a truce between England and France and surveyor of the recently acquired castles at Calais and Picardy. After Parliament curtailed the powers of King Richard following the impeachment of Cardinal de la Pole for negligence and embezzlement in 1386, Edward remained loyal to the king and roused support for him from amongst the nobles, an act for which Edward was rewarded by the king by being elevated to his council in 1389. He remained in favour with King Richard and was made the first warden of the City of London 3 years later. However, Edward's tenure as warden was short-lived, and after a little more than a year in office, Sir Edward Dallingridge died aged 47 in the August of 1393.